My grandmother kept a crock of butter on the counter through the hottest part of summer, and it never once turned. No refrigerator. She didn't own one until she was past 50. And yet the woman fed a family of 6 food that stayed good for weeks, sometimes months on shelves and in cellars and buried in the cool, dark corners of a house that never hummed with a single motor. She didn't keep food cold. She kept the air away from it. That's the whole secret, and it's the one the appliance companies spent 100 years hoping you'd forget. I've sealed my food the old way for the better part of my life now, and half of what's in my kitchen has never seen the inside of a fridge. Cheese that lasts months. Eggs that stay good past the point most people would swear is impossible. Butter on the counter in July. None of it is a trick exactly. It's older than any trick. It's just the way people kept food alive before the electric bill became the price of eating. Stay with me because the method I use to keep eggs fresh for the better part of a year was written down in farmhouse ledgers long before the power lines ever reached the countryside. And the very last one, the one I keep for the things I care about most, is the one the food industry would rather sink to the bottom of the ocean than have you learn. If you still trust the old ways over the humming machine in your kitchen, subscribe now, turn on the notification bell, and stay with me to the end. Here's the thing almost nobody understands about why food goes bad. It isn't time that spoils it, it's air. Oxygen feeds the mold. Oxygen turns the fat rancid. Oxygen carries the moisture that lets bacteria wake up and multiply. A refrigerator only slows all of that down by making everything cold enough that the air works more slowly. But my grandmother figured out something the appliance salesman never mentioned. If you take the air away entirely, you don't need the cold at all. Seal it off, starve it out, and food will hold for weeks or months at room temperature the way it held for every generation before ours. Let me walk you through exactly how it's done. The first thing is fat. A layer of fat is the oldest seal there is, and it's still the best one I know. When my grandmother made a batch of potted meat or a pork roulette, she'd pack it tight into a crock, press it down until there wasn't a bubble left, and then pour a finger of melted lard or clarified butter right over the top. That fat hardened into a lid. No air could reach the meat underneath, and no air meant no spoiling. A crock, sealed that way, sat in her cellar for a month and came out tasting like the day she made it. The French have been doing this for centuries and calling it confit, but it was never a fancy thing in her kitchen. It was Tuesday. Clarified butter does the same job over anything you want to protect. You melt the butter slow, skim the white foam off the top, pour off the golden fat, and leave the milky solids behind in the pan. Those milk solids are what turn butter rancid. Take them out, and what's left will hold on a shelf for months. Pour it over a jar of cooked garlic, over a soft cheese, over anything, and you've built a lid nothing can get through. Now for the eggs, and this is the one I promised you. Long before the icebox, farm families had to make their spring eggs last through a winter when the hens stopped laying. The method was water glass, which is a solution of sodium silicate, and it's still sold today for pennies. You take clean, unwashed eggs, the fresh ones straight from a hen, with the natural coating still on the shell, and you settle them into a crock filled with the water glass solution. The liquid seals every pore in the shell. Air can't get in, so the egg inside stays as fresh as the day it was laid for the better part of a year. My grandmother filled a 5-gallon crock every June and cracked those eggs into her skillet the following spring. Not one ever went bad on her. If you can't find water glass, there's an even simpler version. You rub a fresh, unwashed egg all over with a thin coat of mineral oil or lard and set it back in the carton, pointed end down. The oil seals the shell, the same way the hen's own coating did before somebody washed it off at the packing plant. That's the part most people get wrong. The store scrubs every egg clean, strips away the natural protection, and then tells you it has to live in the cold. Leave the coating on or put one back yourself, and the egg keeps for months on a shelf. Let me stop the countdown here for a moment because this next one is the trick that put more food on my table for less money than anything else I've ever done, and it costs almost nothing to start. Salt. Before there was a single refrigerator on Earth, salt kept the whole world fed. Salt pulls the water straight out of meat and fish, and without water, nothing can rot, because the bacteria that spoil food simply cannot live in it. My grandmother packed slabs of pork belly and coarse salt inside a wooden box, layer after layer, salt and meat and salt again, and left it in the coolest corner of the cellar for weeks. What came out was salt pork that hung from a rafter all winter. The same method turns a fresh fish into something that keeps for a season, and a fresh cut of beef into bresaola. You bury the meat completely, you let the salt do its quiet work, and you rinse it before you cook it. There's no motor, no cord, no monthly cost. Just a mineral that's been sitting in the ground since before we had a word for spoilage. Sugar does the very same thing for fruit, and that's how jam was born. It was never really about making something sweet, it was about making it last. Sugar binds up the water in the fruit so tightly that mold can't touch it, which is why a proper jar of preserves sits on a shelf for a year without a thought. My grandmother cooked her berries down with an equal weight of sugar, poured them boiling hot into a clean jar, and sealed the lid while everything was still steaming. As the jar cooled, it pulled itself shut tight, and that seal held out every speck of air until the day she opened it. That brings me to the jars themselves, because the glass jar with a proper lid is the single most powerful food-keeping tool ever put in a kitchen, and it doesn't ask for a drop of electricity. When you fill a jar with hot food and seal it, the contents cool and contract and pull the lid down until it's airtight. That's the whole science of canning, and people have kept tomatoes, beans, whole chickens, and full soups on a pantry shelf this way for well over 100 years. A properly sealed jar of tomatoes will outlast anything you shove into the back of a refrigerator. And it'll taste better doing it. The trick most people never learn is that the seal is everything. Press the center of a cooled lid. If it doesn't click, it's sealed, and if it's sealed, the food inside is safe from the air that would have ruined it. There's a cousin to this that costs even less, and that's the crock and the brine. Fermentation. You take cabbage, you salt it, you weigh it down under its own juice so not a leaf touches the air, and in a couple of weeks you have sauerkraut that keeps for months in a cool corner. The salt and the good bacteria team up to lock out everything that would spoil it. Pickles, kimchi, half the sour and tangy foods in the world came out of a crock exactly like this, in kitchens that never once owned a refrigerator. What most people miss is the weight. The vegetables have to stay under the surface of the brine. The moment air touches them, they'll spoil, and the moment they're submerged, they'll keep almost indefinitely. Then there's simply taking the water out and letting the air have nothing to feed on. Drying is the oldest method there is. Older than salt, older than fire in some places. My grandmother strung apple rings on a thread across the back of the stove and hung herbs in bunches from the kitchen beam until they were dry as paper. Dried, a food has no moisture left for mold or bacteria to use, so it holds for a year or more in nothing but a paper bag. Beans, corn, Apples, peppers, mushrooms, whole gardens went up on strings in the fall and came down all winter long. There's no seal simpler than taking away the very thing spoilage needs to live. Now, I want to be straight with you because I'd rather you trust me than be dazzled by me. Not everything on this list works everywhere. If you live somewhere the air stays thick and damp for weeks at a stretch, drying is going to fight you, and you'll want salt or a sealed jar instead. Fresh meat in high summer heat still deserves respect and real care. So learn the method properly before you lean on it. These aren't magic. They're the tools people use to stay alive, and they demand a little attention in return. But used right, in the right climate, they'll keep your food longer than the cold box ever could. Here's one that surprised me the first time I saw it, and it costs nothing at all. Root vegetables want to be buried, not chilled. Carrots, beets, turnips, and potatoes will keep for months if you pack them in damp sand inside a box in a cool, dark corner. The sand holds just enough moisture to keep them from shriveling and just little enough air to keep them from rotting. My grandmother kept a sandbox of carrots in her cellar that fed us straight through until spring, and they came out as crisp as the day they went in. Apples do nearly the same thing, wrapped one at a time in newspaper so a single bad one can't spoil the whole crate. The old cellar wasn't a primitive thing. It was engineering, worked out over generations, and it ran on nothing but the steady cool of the earth. Honey deserves its own mention because honey never spoils. Not in months, not in years, not in centuries. Jars of it have been pulled out of ancient tombs, still perfectly good to eat. The reason is that honey has almost no water in it, and just enough natural acid that bacteria simply cannot survive there. Anything you submerge fully in honey takes on a little of that protection. My grandmother kept it as a sweetener, a medicine, and a preservative all at once, and she never had to think about it going bad, because it simply doesn't. And there's the humble root cellar principle underneath all of it, which is that a cool, dark, steady place is worth more than a machine. A north-facing corner, a basement shelf, an insulated box against a shaded wall. Anywhere the temperature stays low and even will hold food longer than most people believe. The enemy isn't just air and water, it's swings in temperature that wake food up and put it back to sleep over and over until it gives out. Find the steadiest, cool spot in your home, and you found the free refrigerator that every household relied on before the power company sold us a louder one. Now here's the last one, the one I told you the food industry would rather forget, and it ties every other method together. It's the sealed layer over anything you want to protect for the long haul. My grandmother would fill a crock with rendered lard or tallow, and inside that fat, she'd suspend sausages, cooked meats, whole preserved things completely surrounded, not a single point of them touching the open air. Fully submerged in fat, cured meat kept in her cellar for the better part of a year, without a flicker of electricity. That's the deepest version of the very first trick I gave you, and it's the one every old kitchen knew and every appliance catalog quietly buried, because a family that can seal a year's worth of food into a crock of fat is a family that doesn't need to buy the machine or the electricity to run it, or the packaged replacements when the machine fails. There was never any money in teaching you that. There was only money in making you forget. My grandmother lived to a great old age, sharp to the end, in a kitchen that stayed quiet because nothing in it ever needed a plug. She kept butter on the counter and eggs in a crock and a winter's worth of carrots in a box of sand, and she fed everyone who walked through her door. When she was gone, what she left behind wasn't an appliance. It was a way of seeing food that the world had nearly thrown away, the understanding that you don't have to keep food cold. You only have to keep the air off of it, and the rest takes care of itself, the way it did for every generation that came before the hum. None of these methods are secret, and not one of them is illegal. They're just older than the machine and quieter and cheaper, and they were passed down the way this kind of knowing has always traveled, from one careful pair of hands to the next. If your own grandmother had a way of keeping food that I didn't cover today, I truly want to hear it, so tell me in the comments. And if this changed the way you think about that machine humming in your kitchen, leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so the next one finds you. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next one.